This is Pep. And this is Guardiola. He's one of the best pivots Barcelona has ever had and has the trophy cabinet as a player to prove it. This is Sergio Busquets, and he's perhaps the greatest pivot of all time, regardless of club. The moment Pep and Busquets met at La Masia may have seemed innocuous, but it signaled a changing of the guard, as Pep would help mold one of the finest midfielders the sport has ever seen. But a combination of Busquets' all-time great career and Pep's managerial achievements mean that Guardiola's talents as a player are often overlooked. So just how good was Pep the player, and how similar are he and Busquets? Both played for sides whose managers ideally wanted to have as much of the ball as possible. Cruyff in particular looked to develop Guardiola to be the hub of the team, just as Busquets would later become for Pep. For the majority of his career, Busquets' position and system have remained consistent, a 4-3-3 where he operates as the deepest pivot in a possession-heavy side. Pep could operate in much the same way, but a key difference is that he more often had to adapt to different systems. This could have been Cruyff's 3-4-3 or Van Gaal's, or later in his career at Roma, where he played in a 3-5-2 or even a 4-4-2 at times, meaning Guardiola had to showcase more tactical versatility. This adaptability translated to his positional sense, where Guardiola had to take on a few more roles over the course of his career. However, make no mistake, he was primarily a defensive midfielder. The nuances of how the two players operated on the ball is reflective of both the eras they played in, as well as their managers' philosophies. Both were supremely gifted on the ball and were often the first port of call their team looked for at every opportunity. Under Pep as a manager, Busquets thrived in a system where positional play was key, meaning the pivot was expected to maintain his central position as much as possible as the hub of the team. However, when playing against high-pressing teams, if the centre-backs were under pressure, Busquets could invoke La Salida La Volpiana, dropping between the centre-backs to become the third man, providing an outlet. This movement was also effective when Busquets was man-marked, as by dropping deep, even without receiving the ball, he created space for teammates higher up the pitch, specifically giving players like Iniesta and Messi more room in the midfield. Guardiola, while capable of similar movement, had more freedom in Johan Cruyff's fluid total football style of play. This could involve dropping into the backline as well, particularly when looking to defend against an opposition counter-attack, but he was also adept at moving into slightly wider positions, especially when the fullbacks or wider centre-backs had ventured higher up the pitch. This movement gave Pep the space to receive from the centre-backs or drew markers away from the compact centre of the pitch, creating room for teammates. Perhaps the key similarity between the two is their relative lack of physicality. Busquets, despite his height, has never been physically imposing on the ground or in the air, while Pep's slight build and their shared lack of pace meant it was their footballing IQ they would have to depend on to stand out and overcome more physical players. When facing significant physical pressure, Busquets had honed two traits: immaculate close control that let him evade presses with subtle shifts of the ball and dragbacks, and his extraordinary spatial awareness and intelligence, which allowed him to deceive opponents with a simple body feint, often sending them on a wild goose chase without even touching the ball. But there was another key difference that affected their toolkits. Busquets' era saw a steady rise in highly organized and highly structured pressing systems, compared to Guardiola's era, which was a lot less press-heavy, meaning he naturally had more space around him than Busquets, whose touch had to be even tighter, though it should be noted that Guardiola's touch was still far from poor. But the difference in pressing eras was also key to how they looked to develop their passing range. Busquets was almost exclusively a short, snappy passer to move them across the pitch, paired with the occasional piercing, disguised pass to break the opposition lines. Pep, as the hub of the team, had the same short passes in his back pocket, but as part of a much more expansive team that had a different dimension to it, Pep also had a rifle of a long pass, scoping for his wingers to switch the play or get them in behind a high line. While neither was primarily an attacking threat, Pep was slightly more adventurous, using his positional freedom to venture higher up the pitch and occasionally unleash stunning finishes from range. His ability to unlock defenses should not be underrated. With a plethora of elite attackers to aim for, he could slip the ball through the tight spaces or execute well-placed chips onto the foot of an onrushing attacker. Busquets, on the other hand, knew his role and was content to circulate the ball in high attacking positions, often deferring to the likes of Xavi, Iniesta and Messi for the final offensive actions. However, as his career progressed, he began to take on more line-breaking responsibility, helping his side progress into higher attacking positions with incisive passing. And while it's clear that both were more on-the-ball midfielders, Busquets had better luck in using his intelligent positioning and his telescopic legs to intercept opposition attacks, and Pep liked kicking lumps out of people. Another thing these two have in common is sheer influence. Busquets' dominance in this role for over a decade has seen it reinterpreted, with more and more players emerging to play the role of the metronome. And Pep's influence? Well, where to start? Click on this video to see how he changed football forever.